Hello, and welcome to the ReImagine Turtle Creek Watershed and Airshed Communities Plus October program. The Turtle Creek Watershed and Airshed are on traditional Osage, Shawnee, Iroquois, and Massawamik land. If you're not sure what native land you stand on today, native-land.ca is a good resource to start. Tonight's program is a part of ReImagine TICWAC, a community-led grassroots initiative to envision and implement sustainable community and economic development. ReImagine Turtle Creek, made up of the eastern suburbs of Pittsburgh, provides regenerative opportunities, education, resources, and action-based working groups to provide a vibrant and healthy future for Southwest Pennsylvania. The initiative is a partnership project between several organizations, including Climate Reality Project, League of Women Voters, Protect BT, Sustainable Monroeville, and Vegan Spirituality Southwest PA. Active TICWAC projects include an organic gardening program for low-income households, an effort to revitalize the Monroeville Mall into a hub for sustainable design, and a media platform where followers learn about sustainable living through hearing others' personal stories. In addition to sustainable development projects, TICWAC hosts regular educational programming like the program today that explores local sustainable regenerative practices and projects. We're excited to be joined tonight by several esteemed panelists who are working on transitioning our region to be more sustainable. Our moderator tonight is Larry Schweiger. Thanks so much for being here, Larry. Larry Schweiger is the president emeritus and past CEO of Penn Future. For 10 years prior, he was the president and CEO of National Wildlife Federation. Under Larry's leadership, fighting climate change became the Federation's top priority. Collaborating with the late Senator John Hines, Larry played a critical role in the passage of the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments to curb acid rain through a cap and trade strategy. The Blue-Green Alliance presented Larry with their Right Stuff Award for his leadership on the auto efficiency rules. His book, Last Chance Preserving Life on Earth, won first prize for nonfiction and first prize for science at the Indie Book Awards in 2011. Larry is the founding chairman of the National Institute for Conservation Leadership, an organization dedicated to strengthening volunteer leadership. Larry also worked with former Vice President Al Gore to launch Climate Reality and currently serves on the Climate Reality Board and as chair of Climate Reality Action Fund. Larry also acted as the founding executive director of the Friends of Gettysburg National Parks, and that is an amended bio. By the way, I am Annie Deely. I am the community organizer of ReImagine Turtle Creek, and I use she, her pronouns. But now I'm going to pass it off to Larry Schweiger, our moderator for tonight.
Well, thank you, Annie, and thank you all for being here this evening. Tonight's program will feature several really top leaders in our community. Dr. Patricia DeMarco, Laura Chu Wiens, Dr. Neil Donahue, and Megan Tuñón. These presentations will highlight how the Southwestern Pennsylvania region is confronting climate change crisis. We will then have an opportunity for general questions and answers. We ask you that you put your questions in for all the panelists in the chat room. And after the question and answers, we will have breakouts where you'll be able to choose the room that most interests you. And in that breakout, you'll be able to network and have more specific informal information and conversations about the topic. Thanks again for joining us tonight. Our first speaker will be Dr. Patricia DeMarco, and she is a native of Pittsburgh with a doctorate degree in biology from the University of Pittsburgh. She spent 30 years in a career in energy and environmental policy in both the private and public sectors. She is a Rachel Carson Scholar and served as executive director of the Rachel Carson Homestead Association and director of the Rachel Carson Institute at Chatham University. She holds the office of vice president of the Forest Hill Borough Council. She sits as secretary on the board of trustees for Phipps Conservatory and Botanical Gardens, and serves on the board of directors of the Allegheny Land Trust and for the Battle of Homestead Foundation. With that, I'll turn it over to Patricia.
Thank you so much, Larry. I appreciate a chance to have this opportunity to speak with my colleagues and friends here at the ReImagine Turtle Creek. I am really very, very happy to be here with you. I know you've been working hard on this initiative about what local government can do about climate change and how we can move together from awareness problem to taking effective action on the problem. And I speak to you out of the experience of being in a community that has deep roots in Pittsburgh, in history of innovation, as it was one of the centers of the Westinghouse research facilities, now sadly horizontal because of a misplaced effort to try to retrieve the building, and they released all the asbestos and made the site basically a disaster. But we have made a net zero energy passive solar design building, which was completed at the end of 2017. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the importance of community-based action in going forward from being aware and just worried and stressed to being effective at finding solutions. And one of the first and most important things is to create a shared vision between the community activists and the leaders and the people in a community. Whether your community is a single county or an area or a region, as this is the ReImagine Appalachia region, you need to have a shared vision of where you're going. People will not move into a vacuum. You have to really help to articulate what it is that we're trying to do, and then evaluate the options and the plans, do community charrettes, and really listen to what people want to have happen. And I know you've been doing a lot of this in the ReImagine Turtle Creek and come up with some wonderful, amazing ideas. This can happen all over in every community, all across our region, all across our country. People know what they want to do and they know how to go about it. So we need to then build the case fiscally, environmentally, socially, bringing together all the parts, the economy, the culture, and the environment, so that we have a harmonious balance among the elements that make society work. And then seek the funding, share progress, celebrate our success, and then talk about it, recruit other people. So one of the first things that we did when we started moving our community forward was we talked about engaging our community. We did a whole bunch of charrettes. We had close to 180 people involved in 6 or 7 different community meetings in living rooms, in council chambers. And the priorities that they came out with were that we not increase taxes, that we improve service, preserve our history, and adopt a green design. And this was a broadly supported set of values that we've incorporated now into not only our new building, but also into our comprehensive plan and our climate action plan. We adopted an update to our climate action, to our community comprehensive plan that included both environment and climate goals. And we adopted a resolution that we're still in the Paris Accord and took the challenge. This is the Woodland Hills High School Climate Action Team. What an awesome, amazing bunch of kids. They challenged their school board to do a climate action plan, and they're actually working on it. And so we then did in our climate action plan adopt a zero carbon emission by 2050 climate action plan in January of last year. And what we have now is a vision statement for our community that was widely accepted, that we bought into, talking about the natural beauty and the inclusiveness and diversity and the balance of cultural, recreational, educational services in the safe, secure neighborhoods. And this is something that we really are beginning to make material and to articulate into action plans. Our climate profile is much as many other communities of our size, mostly residential, a smaller amount of commercial, transportation, solid waste management, and water and wastewater treatment. We found that our vulnerabilities were a little surprising. 40% of our area is vulnerable to landslide due to the steep terrain and the undermining from prior mining activities. and building on filled land. So this becomes an area of vulnerability when you have heavy storms and when we have surges from weather-related events. So that was a significant finding. I'll give you a quick look at the map. You can see how much of our town is subject to either recent landslides or slopes that have conspicuous soil creep, where we have vulnerabilities in that area. So climate action isn't limited to people out on the coasts or out where they're having wildfires and droughts. Right here, we have vulnerabilities as well. We assumed about a 3.34% overall reduction in greenhouse gas emissions per year. And this is what that looks like based on a model. But this is an idealized trajectory, especially getting beyond the 2030 goal areas. There will be some really necessary federal and state policy initiatives to support getting all the way to near zero emissions from fossil carbon emissions. It doesn't mean that you stop using energy. It just means that you rethink your systems. And I put these up here and I'm beginning to think I don't need to go through all this in detail, but just to give you an idea that in the near term, we were focusing on low cost, no cost activities that everyone could pretty much do. And we've been promoting these on our website and in our Tree City Times and in our communications to the citizens. We have in fact adopted a active transportation plan. We have adopted our MS4 consent decree for water and waste management already. We're working on different ways of doing parking and transportation, including better access to public transit in our community. So these things are all in motion. But when you get to 2030, where we really are going to need to do a lot more regional collaboration to have this work, we're looking at having revolving loan funds or some other way to help people fund the necessary changes. I'm very interested to track and see what happens with the infrastructure plan and the Build Back Better initiatives that are pending in Congress, because it may be possible that we can fund some of these initiatives in our local area. And just the last one, the long-term plan, where we are looking at local collaborative mechanisms for both businesses and residences to establish photovoltaic. I hope to have a virtual net meter over our whole business district and a microgrid. We have a lot of really interesting ideas going forward, but we're going to need to work on the underpinnings for these kinds of initiatives. The main thing we had to recognize is that we're not going to be able to solve this kind of a plan by ourselves. We are a member of the Congress of Neighboring Communities surrounding Pittsburgh, 35 communities that work together, and we're adopting a climate action plan together. We've already been working on infrastructure and utility services, and looking at things that we can do to help with human resources and with government, including inclusion and resilience in our planning processes. So this is one of the ways that small communities can be more effective. You reach out to each other and band together with people who have similar and adjoining issues, so you can be more effective and consolidate your influence and consolidate your resources. Then we look at local governments as the prime movers. We reached out to our neighboring communities in the entire Ohio River Valley, especially around the issue of the build out of plastic infrastructure. The whole ReImagine Appalachia initiative started from people thinking that there was a better fate for our Ohio River Valley than to become the next plastic-centered Cancer Alley like they have in Louisiana. We see a different fate, a better fate, and a better future. And so joining our voices together, joining the power of our collective congressional delegations, joining together to influence legislation in our states, and looking at the potential of shared efforts on some of these initiatives so that we can build a shared prosperity that works for all of us. It's been a very exciting journey so far. And we watch on a daily basis what's happening in Congress. And I know that at some point we're going to have answers coming out of there. But I say that the people who are in a position to take advantage of things that are coming down from the federal level are those who have made a plan, who have a vision for where to go, and have made the colleagues, the connections, the collaborations. Because if they're going to put things out in $1 million blocks, okay, we're going to have to consolidate our projects in order to be effective. So collaborations like the Turtle Creek, Watershed, and Airshed communities, these are the kinds of things that are going to give us the tools we need to move forward effectively. So I'll stop there and turn it back to you, Larry.
Well, thank you, Patricia. And also I want to say I'm with you 100% on the Build Back Better. We desperately need to move ahead. This has been a long time in coming.
Yep.
And certainly needed.
Everybody
Next
has to call your
okay.
congressman. You have to.
Our next speaker is Laura Chu Wiens, who's been a member of the Pittsburghers for Public Transit Board since 2013 and involved in his resident campaigns to restore bus service in transit deserts. She assumed the staff position of executive director in June of 2017. Laura has her roots in labor organizing with Unite Here and draws from her experience recruiting and training leaders in the service industry to mobilize transit work riders in the fight for equity, access, and transparency within our public agencies. Laura is Chinese American and believes in the collective power of people transforming their communities. Laura.
Thank you so much, Larry. I appreciate it. I'm going to also share my screen. Hard to go after Dr. Patty DeMarco, but here we are. Let's see. Play from start. Okay, so I'm going to try to be brief. I have a timer next to me. So Our Money, Our Solutions, rider-led planning for mobility justice. I'm with Pittsburghers for Public Transit. For those of you that don't know, we are a grassroots organization of transit riders and transit workers who are fighting for expanded, equitable, and accessible transit in Allegheny County and beyond. So very briefly, why should we support public transit? It's a critical economic engine. It's a critical climate and environmental solution and an important equity issue. And I'll sort of touch upon those three principles and planks more as we go along, but to focus for a second about why it's so important for the climate. As many of you, I'm sure, are aware, transportation emissions have now exceeded all other forms of emissions in causing climate change. And frankly, this is a problem that we are not going to electrify in the United States. And it's not a problem that we're going to electrify our way out of. So I think a lot of times when people think about addressing climate change through transportation, they think about electrification of fleets, electrifications of single occupancy vehicles. And we need to actually shift more people into taking public transit and mass transit. And for that to happen, there are a lot of barriers to overcome, some of which I'm going to talk about. So, you know, we really believe that solutions should come from the people that are most impacted by the problems. And so not only do the riders that we work with in communities across Allegheny County, you know, raise up the concerns that they see and the issues that they're facing with accessing and public transit, but they also work together to think through the solutions. And so we advocate around the solutions that they lift up. And so just as an important note about why this is such an important equity issue, in particular right now, so 35% of transit users during the pandemic specifically have annual household incomes of less than $15,000. And you can see that the share of transit ridership by race for African Americans and Hispanic riders, Pacific Islanders, Native Americans, and others, you know, have significantly increased. And it's always been true that, at least in Allegheny County, people of color are a higher proportion of transit riders. So we know this is an issue that disproportionately affects marginalized communities. And we also know that owning a car is really expensive. It costs more than $8,000 a year on average to own a vehicle. And so, and not to mention, there are a lot of other reasons why people are not able to drive a vehicle, people with disabilities, older adults, youth. And so tending to mobility needs, and we believe that mobility is a human right because it provides access to everybody's, the other critical needs that they have, including healthcare and education, housing, and so on. That having accessible public transit becomes essential for ensuring that, in particular, marginalized folks have access, in sort of speaking broadly. So one of the things that we've been working on in the last year and a half, we've had a much broader campaign about having more equitable fares, but I think in particular during the pandemic, we really think about having fare relief for low-income riders as a critical intervention, not dissimilar to the need to, give out free food from food banks, to give out, to have evictions moratoriums with housing. It's no different than to say that riders should not be turned away from accessing transportation because of their inability to pay. And when you think about the largest single share of riders being those with household incomes of $15,000 or less, it's a very significant problem. And I think that, municipalities have resources at their disposal right now, with the American Rescue Plan Act, with the CARES Act. There are resources to allow people to have better access to public transportation as well as other critical needs. And what's nice about that is that not only does it save money that they could then move towards paying for other critical needs like utilities and rent and things like that, but then they're also opened up to the entire network of our transportation system. So that's one critical project we've been working on. But to focus specifically on Turtle Creek and the Mon Valley, one of the efforts that we've been working on in the last several years with many residents of your communities is what we call the Beyond the East Busway campaign. In 2017, we were engaged in a really robust campaign with a lot of residents and riders and community leaders in Turtle Creek and East Pittsburgh and Braddock and other places to stop cuts that were proposed to the Mon Valley on the 61 bus lines in conjunction with the bus rapid transit corridor that is still being in the process of being built between Pittsburgh and the city center and Oakland. And we won that campaign. We stopped those cuts, but riders at the back end of it were like, it's not much of a victory to maintain a dismal status quo. And it is dismal because while service is limited and has seen enormous cuts over the last 20 years, ridership in the Mon Valley is some of the highest in the state. In fact, 5 of the top 10 municipalities with the highest transit commutership are in the Mon Valley out of the entire state. That includes all of the Philadelphia region, where the highest percentage of workers are reliant on public transit. So we built this tool called Beyond the East Busway, and it was to help folks in the region really think about what it would mean to have quality transit like the East Busway in their communities to help connect them to critical needs. And and folks were able to identify using this tool the places that they wanted to go to by transit, and they wanted to see better service connecting them to. And out of it, we came out with 3 transit priority corridors that we're going to advocate for. And we have made enormous progress on it, having just recently won it as 3 of the critical top 10 priorities in the Port Authority's long range plan. And we are now in the process of advocating for the federal money to fund it, like similar to what Dr. Patty DeMarco said, having plans that are built from the ground up, that are shovel ready, that really encompass our vision is what's going to get funded. And I should just note that what was inspiring about this work was not the tool that we created, which was really wonderful. It has this really amazing effort of participatory, rider-led planning, but that we also had a cohort of 16 resident leaders from the Mon Valley that were paid to help go to food pantries, to bus stops, to community days to help residents take this survey. And so we got some very, very powerful data that nobody else has secured, showing people's travel patterns, but also their travel desires. I know that I'm running out of time, so I will be very quick. Another thing municipalities are really important for is that most of the funding for public transit comes from the state, and most of the legislators who determine whether transit is funded in a dedicated way, in a robust and fully funded way, are located in parts of the state that don't actually have as much transit. And so we've been, over the last year, because there's a very important transit funding measure that's about to expire, hiring community organizers across the state to canvass riders and working with the local amalgamated transit union workers to develop constituencies to move legislators for a state funding solution for transit that our riders and workers across the state developed. Two more things, and I'm just going to stop barreling along. One is that another thing that's just interesting and important to know is that we had a campaign around bundling access to affordable housing and transit. So municipalities really need to think about their responsibility and role in ensuring that affordable housing is paired with and matched with quality transit and access to public transportation. And we had been doing a lot of advocacy around a particular Giant Eagle redevelopment in East Liberty that is set to be redeveloped. And we took the opportunity to work with partners in the housing community and the food justice community to call for the Giant Eagle to reduce the amount of structured parking that they were building and use that savings, which is enormous, to pay for free bus passes for residents, pay for deeply affordable and quality housing, and expand access to quality food. And that's a win-win for the environment. If you can get people out of cars, and parking drives demand for taking cars and into buses, especially where transit is robust, then we see many benefits, not only for the climate, but also for pedestrian safety and things like that. And lastly, we are in the process of building a platform for pushing the city of Pittsburgh around the role that they play in either obstructing transit or creating access to transit. And I think what we will come out with is a sort of 100 days platform for the new administration that will be coming in, mayoral administration, about the policies that they are directly responsible for that could really transform transit. And so you can see here, what we'll be really aiming for is a commitment to support public transit over private mobility companies, venture-backed companies, connected, comfortable, accessible, and safe pedestrian and bike connections. So all the stuff around sidewalk infrastructure and crosswalks and all that is critical for transit users. That we want bus-only lanes and some priority for buses so that they're not stuck behind cars with 40 people, behind a single person in a vehicle. And really thinking about legislation and zoning that supports transit use. So lots of work to be done there. We hope that what we will come out of this with is a suite of policies that could be shared among municipalities with Connect to further transit all over the county. So thanks so much. And I look forward to the breakout groups.
Laura, thank you so much for all your good work. It's really pretty exciting. I remember taking streetcars as a boy, and the joy of being able to travel across the city on streetcars was something that was important to me. And my grandmother actually worked for the mayor of Pittsburgh back in the Davy Lawrence days, and was really upset with the decisions that were being made after that to remove the streetcars. So thanks for what you're doing. I'm sure my grandmother is smiling down on you. Our next speaker is Dr. Neil Donahue, who's a professor at the departments of chemistry, chemical engineering, and public policy at Carnegie Mellon University. Neil also directs the Steinbrenner Institute for Environmental Education and Research. He seeks to understand how the Earth's atmosphere works and how humans affect the atmosphere. One of his objectives is to help graduating Carnegie Mellon students to understand the climate problem and to apply their outstanding problem-solving skills to solutions of this enormous challenge. He's a member of numerous professional societies, a fellow of the American Geophysical Union, and an editor of several academic journals. Donahue also received his BS in physics from Brown University in 1985, a PhD in meteorology from MIT in 1991. He spent 9 years as a research scientist at Harvard before returning to Pittsburgh in 2000 with his spouse, Maureen Cook, and his child, Innes, they live in Squirrel Hill.
Thank you very much, Larry. And the returning should make it clear that I am a native Pittsburgher.
Yeah.
I grew up off of Dorseyville Road and left in 1974 to come back to a different city. So to me, these are coupled questions of social justice, environmental justice, and climate justice. I call them the 3 J's, and they're, as you've already heard, inextricably coupled. And just to kind of emphasize what we just heard, one thing we've identified when it comes to buses is the importance of ensuring that those forms of public transportation are pollution-free and climate emission-free, because the fact that buses tend to go where people go means, in the jargon, a thing we call covariance. The emissions from buses are about 60% more toxic, if you will. They kill 60% more people than if you just average those emissions across the county. This is why things like the no idling provision in public schools are so important, but in general, why also investing in zero carbon, zero direct emissions modes of buses and other forms of public transportation is incredibly important. So the first thing I need to start all of these discussions with is just to ensure that we pound this message into people that carbon dioxide lasts forever. The climate effects of carbon dioxide emissions last about 100,000 years. And so when we talk about decarbonization, we mean it. When Patty is showing plans that go to zero carbon, we mean zero. That's what we really have to do. We have to get to zero carbon. The developed world needs to be reducing those carbon emissions by about 10% per year, starting now. 40 years ago, when the Charney report came out, that was starting in 40 years, or starting in 20 years would have been nice. 7 years ago, when I started writing about these things, I had the reduction starting in 2000 to give it a little bit of time to get going. It needs to be now. That last 20 or 30% is hard. There's no mistake about it. It's difficult to get there. It needs transformations, but we do know how to do it. As Patty often says, it's not the technology, it's the will. But it's going to take careful planning, especially in that final chunk. That will stabilize climate near 2 degrees warming. So that's the bad news. If we actually want to get climate back down, get it to 1.5 degrees or whatever that, we actually are going to have to take carbon dioxide out of the air. There's almost no way around that. That's simply what the science says. However, if I were emperor, which you probably don't want, here's a couple of things I would do. I would invest in home efficiency, weatherization, and all. The very early report by the McKinsey Corporation introduced the idea of what we call a cost curve, which is really simple. Line up the things you can do by 2 things. How effective are they? How much carbon, in this case, how much emissions will they reduce? And then what's their cost? And do the least expensive, most sensible things financially first. And the good old weatherization and efficiency improvements are net wins, right? They save money and they reduce carbon emissions, and incentivizing that in many ways would be the first thing. Having a carbon tax affects the cost directly, because we talk about external costs of environmental damage and climate damage and environmental economics. And so the most direct way of internalizing those costs is a $30 a ton CO2 emissions increasing by $30 a year for 20 years, $600 a ton at the end of it. That would be, by the way, about $6 a gallon on gasoline, and then returning that across the board to people in an even amount per person. So you get taxed according to how much you use, and then the returns are to everybody equally. That's essentially the Citizens Climate Lobby plan. It's a big number, but that internalizes that cost. And then, as we talked about transport, invest in long-range transmission to get solar and wind electricity beyond the weather, because one of the biggest issues with sun and wind is the so-called intermittency, that when the wind isn't blowing for a week, which happens when it's cloudy and you have relatively poor photovoltaics for an extended period of time, which happens, then the capacity that needs to be planned for is higher. If you can move electricity beyond 1,000 miles or so and get it beyond the synoptic scale of weather, you can have a huge effect on that. And that can be done, but it requires infrastructure investments at least the regional scale. Then indeed electrifying, because we really do, at the end of the day, need carbon-free transportation modes. And it's hard to get around a lot of that being electrification, even though just imagining electrifying single-use vehicles, single passenger vehicles, I completely agree, is way oversimplified. But one thing we can do is invest in electrifying freight railroads, because essentially, as far as I can tell, the long haul freight, Mack trucks on the interstates, figuring out how to electrify those or make those true electric vehicles, that's pretty tough. You go to Europe, essentially all the railroads are overhead electricity. So that's one that I would do straight away. And then finally, address sustainable food production. I already had this in my notes. I saw a question from Jim McClure in the chat about nitrous oxide emissions, but there's a bigger one than that. The ammonia that's used for fertilizer is actually carbon dioxide, because the way we make ammonia since the Haber-Bosch process was developed is to take methane and in the absence of oxygen, you've essentially combust some of the methane to make heat over a copper catalyst at very high pressure. You generate ammonia from dinitrogen gas. And that carbon from that methane, the hydrogen goes into the ammonia, the carbon goes into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. And so the sort of basis of the industrial agriculture system is on carbon emissions, and that can't continue as that. So what you need is mixed husbandry, greatly reduced meat consumption, more local food. Not everything is going to be local. We'll still move things around, but sustainable agriculture is a critical part. So that's the thumbnail of the things I would do if I were emperor, but a few more specifics that are a bit more local. And one is this coupling between the three J's, and specifically that air pollution and climate change are incredibly closely coupled. The pollution is different. So carbon dioxide climate pollution is dispersed around the globe and lasts forever, as I said. From the same process, the same combustion that emits that carbon dioxide is responsible for about 3/4 of the fine particle air pollution that we breathe in Pittsburgh. And that kills at least 250 people around the county every year, right here. And the residence time of that pollution is way shorter. It is dispersed regionally, but it's not dispersed globally. Those particles survive for about a week in the atmosphere, and a lot of their effects are within a couple of 100 miles of the emission source. And so that's a very local consequence to the exact same thing that is causing a lot of the climate change. And so if you turn that around, our solutions to the local air pollution problem are a climate solution, and they will save of order 200 deaths per year in the county from improving air quality locally, and be a major source of decarbonization. So that's the win-win of that. The lockdown proved to be what we call a natural experiment for atmospheric scientists. My colleagues Rebecca Tanzer and Albert Presto, with their distributed what they call ramp sensors around Pittsburgh, were able to see the effect on air pollution of the early lockdown when there was essentially no commuting to work. And what they saw is that the vehicular emissions were gone. So as one might expect, but in areas that were close to industry, like Clairton, there was still a very strong diurnal profile following the standard pattern of the atmospheric boundary layer, because something like 1/4 of the total air pollution is coming from those industrial sources in our region. So we have a pretty good idea of that there's many different sources of air pollution, but those mobile sources, as we call them, the vehicles, are certainly one of them, and local industry is certainly another. there is a major role for decarbonizing electricity and essentially electrifying elements of the economy, but we have to decarbonize that electricity. It does no good to use electric vehicles if the electricity is coming from coal. The energy helps people live better lives. I don't think there's any way we can get around that. We want to use energy. People want to use energy. They do. That energy use is more or less directly transformed into prosperity, but it has consequences and costs as well. And so we need to increase the efficiency of the use of that energy, both the obvious efficiency, the leaks, the insulation and such, but then also those external costs of environmental damage. So to give you a sense, every person in the United States is responsible for about 10 kilowatts of, if we turned it all into electricity, be equivalent to 100 watt light bulbs on all the time for every single one of us. Europe, with a similar income, arguably in many cases a higher standard of living, uses about half. And the prices for things like gasoline are significantly higher. And so it's essentially valued more. We need to change the building code. Some of this stuff is just straight roll up the sleeves stuff in terms of that preparation. There's many elements of the building code and also the electric utility law that Patty can say much more about than I can, that limits the ability to do things like local microgrids. And then really we do need to invest in non-automotive mobility. I had that in capital notes in my notes already. This is an enormous environmental justice issue because of the pollution coming out of sort of traditional diesel buses, but both the mobility and then the flip side of what gets moved around. So thriving local businesses where people don't need to get in a car and jump in a car and go to the mall to do their shopping or go to a large grocery chain to do their shopping. But the more we can get and return to local grocers and local businesses and move the freight closer to people and reestablish thriving local business districts that allow people to walk or to bike and not even necessarily take the bus to work, in my opinion, the better off we'll be. So to return to the efficiency and then finish up here, just to, especially in lower income communities, a shocking amount of personal income is spent on heating homes. And it doesn't need to be. And that's an example of pure inefficiency. And so locally, as the more we can invest in insulating homes, and then ultimately, again, getting away from natural gas. So one of the things when we moved back to Pittsburgh, one of many, many, many things that after having been away for 26 years, was like, oh, I'm home. That fire tower on Washington Boulevard was one of them. But another was all those gas meters just right smack out in the front lawn. You don't have that anywhere else in the country, but it's like, oh yeah, I remember those. All of our heating, essentially residential heating, is natural gas, and about a third of the energy that we use in the region is local, is in residence, and a lot of that is heating. That natural gas is methane, just to make sure everyone knows that CH4 methane. When you burn it, you get carbon dioxide. I'm not even talking about leakage of the methane, but you burn methane, you burn natural gas, you get carbon dioxide. And again, those CO2 emissions from local things like cars and the stack of your roof for your residential heating, those aren't capturable. Those really all have to go. And so we need to begin right now thinking about how we can get the structural heating away from the natural gas heating that's been the way the city has done it since about the time of Lawrence. So I think that's what I have to say. So thanks much.
Thank you, Neil. And I listening to you describe getting back to local businesses, I'm remembering Perry Hilltop and the number of little shops that were along the streetcar stops. And perhaps one day we can see that kind of thing again. Our next speaker is Megan Tuñón, who is the executive director of the Etna Community Organization, an Etna Borough Council member, and a member of the Triborough Eco District Advisory Committee. As an Etna resident and executive director of the Etna Community Organization, Megan has stewarded the completion of a new green space and stormwater management site in Etna called the Etna EcoPark, and is currently managing the development of a community center and library known as the Etna Center for Community. In addition to sustainable development projects, Megan is working with partners in Sharpsburg and the Office of Public Art to bring new public art installations to the area. She's also collaborating with the residents and Department of Environmental Protection on watershed stewardship initiatives. Megan is one of the founding board members of ECO before transitioning the role to executive director, and has played a role in the organization's key initiatives and programs such as Etna Art Tour, as well as the certification process that made Etna the world's first certified eco district. I'm looking forward to hearing more about this, Megan.
Great. Well, thanks, Larry. And thank you everyone for having me. I'm going to share my screen as well. See if you guys can all see that. So yeah, I'm Megan Tuñón. I'm the executive director of the Etna Community Organization. I'm going to talk to you about some of the green infrastructure initiatives that Etna has been implementing in our small borough. If you're not aware of where Etna is, it is just across the Allegheny River from the Lawrenceville neighborhood of Pittsburgh. And like many river towns, we've had lots of challenges over the decades. We were founded on the steel industry, and when the mill closed, there was a huge divestment of both resources and people in our community. We've also had to deal with our community being dissected by not just one, but two highway projects. But in the context of climate change, there is one glaring issue that outweighs all the others, which is what I'm going to focus on tonight. And I bet you know what I'm going to say. It's flooding. So Etna sits at the base of a 67 square mile watershed. It's the Pine Creek watershed. This means that all upstream waterways and sewers flow directly into our less than 1 square mile community. In recent years, large rain events have become more frequent. But as you can see from this image here, our most catastrophic floods occurred in 1936, 72, 86, and then most recently in 2004 with the remnants of Hurricane Ivan. So it was after Ivan that Etna Borough developed a new green infrastructure plan called the Green Master Plan that outlined a path forward toward implementing green infrastructure and flood mitigation projects. So I'm going to focus on a few of those projects which have been developed by the borough and some with the help of my organization, ECO. First, as you can see here, are our streetscape projects. The sidewalks in our main business district have been remade with stormwater collection infrastructure. So these decorative grates that you see here on the right, which are very aesthetically pleasing, collect stormwater from the street and from the downspouts in the business district, and they divert the water into retention tanks underneath the street where it's held and then slowly released after the storm event is over, so we don't overwhelm our combined sewer system, which you never want. The network diverts millions of gallons of stormwater each year, excuse me, and helps prevent overflows into Pine Creek and to the Allegheny River during these large rain events. So the innovative design that you see here, it's been visited and studied by groups from all over the country. And just this year, the American Planning Association awarded Butler Street, which is the name of our main drag, one of the best places in Pennsylvania. So we're really excited about that. The borough, it makes a habit, as you can see, of, with a divestment of people, there's been some abandoned properties and blight. So they've made a habit out of rehabilitating these vacant lots into rain garden, kind of bring down some of the impermeability. And it's a really dense municipality that we live in. It's also developed a rain barrel program for residents, which is income-based. We established a community garden on the site of the old municipal building, which was demolished. And we created a nature trail on the side of it was kind of like a dumping ground along Pine Creek beside our municipal baseball fields. This is one of the most popular projects. You can see it on the lower right here. It's visited, all day long by people out taking walks, and it's really beloved. It's also an area that typically floods, and it's the site of a lot of bank stabilization projects. In fact, this area was flooded just last month on September 1st during the remnants of Hurricane Ida that came through. And so that really alleviated some of the stress on the watershed in the areas where roads and homes are. So Etna did okay during that one. So in 2017, we began a conversation with our neighbors in Sharpsburg and Millvale about collaborating on a community development planning project, which Millvale had already begun, called Eco Districts. So over 3 years, we held around 40 free and open to the public events, during which we engaged around 400 community members to create a plan for sustainable community development. Eco Districts protocol focuses on sustainability, resiliency, and equity. And in Etna, Millvale, and Sharpsburg, we broke it down even further into 6 quality of life issues, which you can see here. Social equity, water, obviously, mobility, air quality, energy, and food. And actually, Neil came to speak to our community during our air quality education event. And that quickly became the issue that I was most concerned about after hearing him speak as the mother of 2 young kids. So we learned a lot that night from Neil. So my organization, ECO, was born out of this planning process. We are the stewards of the plan. And we're here to ensure that all the projects that were outlined as being really critical to the community are accomplished. And is really unique in that the municipality and ECO really work in lockstep with each other to carry out the plan. In fact, I'm on the Etna Borough Council, as you just heard, and our borough manager, Mary Ellen Ramage, who is like all-knowing queen of watershed and sewers. She sits on ECO's board. So there's just a lot of cross collaboration going on. Since we were certified as an eco district in 2019, we've been working on 2 really important projects which address the quality of life issues that we focus on. This is the first, the Etna Riverfront Trail and Park, which is actually going to open officially on October 22nd. It's been 10 years in the making. You can see an image of just the old industrial site down here next to the railroad. And then this picture on the right, I took it today. It's not the greatest picture. They were working on it a little bit, but I wanted to show the progress of how this Riverfront Park and Trail is going. We received some funding through the Triborough Eco District from the Henry L. Hillman Foundation, which was able to get the Riverfront Park funding over the finish line. This was, like I said, after 10 years of planning and fundraising and fighting with the railroad by Mary Ellen. So what was once truly an industrialized wasteland zone down by the river has become a beautiful green space, and it has rain gardens and native plants for pollinators. We also incorporated a stage and amphitheater pavilion that runs on solar power. And the park will connect to the Allegheny River Trail at Millvale and extend all the way up the Allegheny corridor to Sharpsburg and Aspinwall and beyond once we get the trail completed. But most importantly, it'll allow our residents to reconnect with the riverfront that we've been cut off from for so long. And finally, at the end of this week, we'll officially open the Etna EcoPark. And this is kind of like a small example of what communities can do to address some of these stormwater issues. This parklet, it's a parklet, it's small. It was built on the site of a condemned building that was flooded during Hurricane Ivan and abandoned. So the borough acquired the property and demolished the site. And they collaborated with ECO to turn it into the park and stormwater management site that you can see here in this image. So the park contains a large rain garden, which captures stormwater runoff from a street that drains from a pretty steep incline off to the right of the image. The walkway and plaza are made of permeable pavers, and the rest of the site contains native plants. There's a raised herb garden for the neighborhood to use, and a little library. This park was truly a community effort. It was constructed almost entirely by people from the neighborhood, some of them donating professional services, but it's mostly just people who are just trying to pick up a shovel or a paintbrush like me, and we got it done. So it was a labor of love and truly a community grassroots effort, and it'll be the site of some future environmental programs that we're planning on holding there. So that's it. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share these, just some of the exciting projects that are taking place in Etna. I'm always happy to talk about the success we've had with our multi-municipal and multi-organizational approach to community development. So I look forward to discussing it further.
Sorry, I muted myself. That's terrible. Thanks so much, Megan, for your wonderful work in Etna. We've been hearing great stories about the changes there, and it's really exciting to see a community like Etna really move forward in a very creative and environmentally sensitive way. So thank you for that. At this time, we're going to have an opportunity for questions and answers with our panelists. If you have a question, please put them in the chat. I noticed that we have some 29 comments so far, and I don't know how many of those are questions, but I would ask each of the presenters to find a question that you want to answer, and I'll start off by picking one. I see Ed Wren has asked about native plants, and I wanted to say, Ed, that back in 1974, I wrote a Wild Plant Protection Act because I was concerned about what was happening in Pennsylvania's wild plants. That law finally became law in 1984. It took us 10 years to get it passed. And today, the state of Pennsylvania is doing great work in identifying critical habitats for wild, particularly rare wild plants, and has established now private and public plant sanctuaries. But clearly, we need to do more with our yards, and that's where your question comes in. I wholeheartedly support the idea of bringing natives back to our yards, cutting down on our lawn mowing, and making the changes in our backyards that we desperately need to do. So thanks for that question.
It wasn't really a question, but thank you for your answer. And I want to tell you that the National Wildlife Federation put out a one-page bio of Lori Otto, who inspired Wild Ones, and that bio inspired me. She was an amazing person. If anybody has ever heard of Lori Otto, O-T-T-O.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for sharing that.
Can I speak to the issue of native plants and planting as public education systems?
Mm-hmm.
Our borough has two very active garden clubs, but one of them in particular, the Late Bloomers Garden Club, has planted the public places along Ardmore Boulevard with native pollinator-friendly gardens. And they also had a milkweed sharing project a couple of years ago. And one of the ladies has hatched out 44 monarch caterpillars into eclosed butterflies this summer alone. She may be up to 45 or 50 by now. And it has had a tremendous resonance in the community where people have started planting, wildflowers along their borders. More and more people taking garden space instead of lawns. So the borders are getting bigger and bigger and the lawns are getting smaller and smaller. And it's really a very appealing transition. And I know there was a time when I grew up in Pittsburgh when practically everybody had a vegetable garden in their yard because it was almost impossible to get fresh vegetables. And you spent the summer canning and you spent the winter, living on what you put away for the winter and traded things. If you had an abundance of zucchini, you traded with somebody who had an abundance of something else. And it's really a community building effort when you have gardening and planting happening as part of a communal effort. And I really encourage it mightily as a way of building community and as a way of also sequestering carbon in the soil. Because when you have organically raised plants or vegetables or farmed material, you are capturing carbon into the fertile ground. instead of, leaving it in the oxygen. It will sequester a tremendous amount of carbon just by improving the fertility of the ground.
I was already going to answer. Go ahead.
I was going to see if there are other panelists that wanted to answer any of the questions that may have come up.
I was going to answer something that actually follows directly on that, and mostly agreeing, but with some suggested nuance or whatnot, which is again relating to the issue of agriculture and climate change and industrial agriculture. The climate change is overwhelmingly driven by combustion of fossil fuels, and so just to be clear, what I am not saying is there is very little evidence that we can magically make soils or trees or to essentially soak up, let's say, all carbon. Sustainable agriculture is very much one of the things that is. I'm stumbling on my words a little because I hate saying we need to do or we should do. I'm very reticent to tell other people what to do directly, but policies that allow us and support local sustainable agriculture are an important part of a solution. The way I would put it is meat and many other commodity foods are their cost does not reflect, their price does not reflect their cost.
Yeah.
And so I do personally do not feel that so-called animal agriculture, animal industrial agriculture is the or even a major cause of climate change, nor is degrading soils a major cause of 19th and 20th and 21st century climate change. It may well have had a role to play over the past several thousand years that's significant and interesting, and that's a whole diversion I could get into, but it's part of the story. But we absolutely must stop emission of fossil fuels into the atmospheres, and we're not going to counteract that by buying, if I fly, which I used to do before 18 months ago, far more than I'd like to admit, if I go and turn around and buy a little tree, I am extremely skeptical that that's a real offset. It's something we ought to do, but I can't feel good about it just because I bought a tree. So they're coupled issues, but the solution is to stop emitting fossil carbon into the, or a huge part of the solution is to stop fossil carbon emissions.
Thank you.
I just want to say the aggregate effect of lawnmowers and other small inefficient gas machines is, to me, very large. I mean, the EPA estimated 5% of total air pollution. It's coming just from lawnmowers. So that's as far as landscaping and native plants, it's mostly getting away from mowing lawns to me.
There's a question about how other regions are transitioning to sustainable economies. I would like to lift up the Center for Coalfield Justice and the Center for Coalfield Development in West Virginia and Westmoreland County and Greene County. They have been doing a lot of reorienting fossil industry workers toward new and emerging opportunity areas to great advantage. And they've been doing some wonderful work in West Virginia in particular around that initiative. So that is one that we could maybe look to as an example of how refocusing people's attention on things that are going forward instead of backward.
Other comments before we go into
I just have to say that I was smiling about the ubiquitous cat in front of participant, and then I realized it was my cat. Anyway.
Any other comments before we go into the breakouts?
Sorry, we can actually go to breakouts at 8:15.
Okay.
Unless we want to move on.
Okay. One question that's not been fully answered, I don't think, is how are other regions transitioning to sustainable economies? Are there other thoughts on how that's happening and who's making real progress, and perhaps some observations you might make about their efforts? One that I would bring to our attention to is the states that are in REGI in the Northeast are, I think, moving ahead on climate policy, not as robust as it needs to be, but certainly far better than what we're doing here in Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania should be a part of REGI. It was originally going to be a part of REGI until the governor at the time pulled out of it. I felt really bad when that happened because I was involved in some of the formation of that effort. But clearly, putting a cap and allowing carbon trading within a region is a real important tool to move the needle, particularly without a federal commitment. Back when we worked on the cap and trade bill in 2008 and 9, we were asking for a 2% a year reduction in carbon emissions to avoid the 1.5 degree rise in temperature that everybody was concerned about. Today, that's up around 7 to 9, perhaps 10% in order to achieve that target, if we can possibly do that. So, we've gone from a gradual curve to a very steep slope in terms of what we have to do. So the goal is to get to a much more robust strategy, one that is sufficient to achieve the numbers that the scientists have been working on and pointing us to. So there's an enormous amount of work to be done by all of us.
And I will just quickly say that in terms of there's the cap and trade versus the carbon tax and all, on the one thing that the more regional, the carbon taxes have a nice purity to them, but they don't work very well at the local level because they don't like edges very much, right? Because they're leaky. Whereas the cap and trade is easier to implement at the regional level more effectively. And so that's anything that incentivizes getting on that. There are two things: starting that trajectory, which, as you say, yeah, now it needs to be 10% per year. But also planning through to the end. So like when I was involved in the Pittsburgh Climate Action Plan, the initial drafts were envisioning sort of 2030 get a 50% reduction, and then it sort of stopped. And actually, I was specifically thinking about those gas meters, because you can get 50% and you can never touch those meters because there's something like a third of the climate footprint, if you will, in the Pittsburgh region. But if you say we actually have to have a plan that gets us to zero, you're not heating houses with residential natural gas anymore. And so it's important to start to put the planning waypoints all the way to the end, even though you don't necessarily know that's exactly the policy or exactly the technology that's going to be in place in 2050. Because often when we impose these things as a mandate, as an emissions reduction, at the sulfur scrubbers on coal-fired power plants or the catalytic converter were both examples of technology that were put in legislation when nobody knew how to do them. Right. And lo and behold, I'm partly a chemical engineer, at least by trade, well, not by training. They're pretty smart, and so they figured out how to do it.
On that point, I was involved in, this dates me, but I was involved in the 1970 Clean Air Act. And we called that law a technical forcing law, because in fact, at that time, we didn't have the technology to tackle the pollutants that we were mandating controls on. And the technology actually grew out of the law itself. And so, in fact, the US became a major exporter of that technology to all other parts of the world. And there was a study done that showed that we made money on it. We actually made money by forcing technology. So I'm a big fan of setting hard targets, of requiring them, embed them in law, and let's all figure out how we get there through technology development. And I have a lot of confidence in the engineers and the people who are a lot smarter than me to figure out how to get there. And I'm confident it's the same idea that President Kennedy had when he wanted to go to the moon. I mean, you set a goal and you move towards that goal by inventing technologies to get you there. And I think we can do that same thing to get to your zero discharge that you were talking about. We certainly have the technology now to get halfway there, and the other technology will get there. We just need to make sure it's mandated, because without the mandates, we simply aren't going to move the needle.
I want to just reinforce that a little bit. I think we're not facing a technology problem in any way, shape, or form. We're facing an ethics problem. We're facing a will to make the changes that are necessary in order for the next generation to have a brighter future. And I think it's a failure of a sense of obligation to the next generation. And you can learn from our indigenous peoples' history of planning 7 generations into the future for major decisions and major actions. I think we could learn a great deal from taking that kind of an approach, because the way we're headed right now, I don't see 7 generations into the future along the path we're traveling.
Your comment about indigenous people reminds me, I recently returned from Wind River Reservation. I work with the tribes in Fort Peck and also in Wind River to take bison from Yellowstone and put it on tribal lands for the purpose of really rejuvenating those landscapes. Bison actually are better for restoring soils. They don't require as much grass, and they're much more efficient producers of protein than a cow. And it so happens that the native flora actually respond to the bison hoof prints. So we have something that we can do here to rethink our federal lands, particularly helping the tribal communities, because bison are an important part of their culture and a part of their sustainability that's been going on for thousands of years. So I feel very strongly that there's some changes, fundamental changes we need to make, and we need to prioritize helping the tribal communities, because we've abused them, and they can help lead us to a new solution. It's interesting that most of the biodiversity richness on this planet is held in ownership by Native people. And that's true in this country. It's true in so many places around the world. I see there's a question about carbon taxing. I think there's an equity question with carbon taxing. So if you tax carbon and don't provide a mechanism for redistributing that money, you're making a big mistake. I think that we need to look at economic justice as well as solutions. I think about, I own an electric car, I have solar panels, I can afford that. I've been able to earn enough money to make those investments, but there's a lot of people who cannot, and who need the bus transportation, who need help with insulation, who need that energy from clean energy sources in other ways. And we need to be thinking about that as we think about how we tax and alter the economic picture for carbon fuels.
Yeah, so the sort of basic plan that it's essentially the Citizens Climate Lobby Plan is predicated on the idea that there's a very strong relationship between energy use and income. That essentially rich people will use more energy, mostly. The mostly is incredibly important. So if that's true, then if I want to buy an Escalade and pump it full of gas, the carbon tax is essentially saying, well, more power to you. It's going to cost a lot more. And then, the way I would do it is I would literally have like a graphite debit card, and every week. So you take all of those proceeds from all of that carbon use at the pump, wherever, and literally every week you divide it by 300 million, and each of those cards gets money. And so as long as that holds, and people, the wealthier people in the economy are using more energy, then it works. If you go out and you have someone who can't live in Telluride because they have to, because the rent is way too high and they've got to drive from Durango to get to a job and make minimum wage, that's a huge problem. So anything like that has to be really careful on that. It doesn't make the glib assumption that, oh, everyone who uses a lot of energy is well off, and so we're just going to be essentially, I mean, it's very progressive on average, but the specifics matter a lot. I completely agree.
The history on this, in 2009, we passed, with the help of Nancy Pelosi, we passed a cap and trade bill in the House. When it went over to the Senate, Senator John Kerry was lobbied heavily by the oil industry to say, we don't want a cap and trade bill, we want a cap and tax bill. And I worked closely with Kerry during that time, and he asked me to appear before a phalanx of cameras when he was going to announce this new cap and tax bill. And the oil industry, 3 oil executives promised that they would show up to be a part of this announcement, would support it. Well, it turns out they did not show up. They were gone. And not only that, but then they attacked him for a cap and tax.
Of course,
bill.
yeah.
And, Kerry was very frustrated. He told me at the time that he was sick of this Senate. And of course, he later took a job as Secretary of State. But that's the history behind that. The tax, when you use the word tax, it's like a toxic pill. And the oil industry spends a lot of money poisoning the public on tax.
Yeah, so fee and dividend, but
yeah, exactly. We've got to find some other way of characterizing this, because they're masters at hammering us. Having been the brunt of a lot of that in the late 2009, I certainly remember the scars.
We can transition to breakout groups.
Okay, great.